Hey, everybody. So, hopefully, you were able to open the Google Doc version of this, but just in case that you couldn't, I also uploaded it as a Microsoft Word document. So, in either event, you should be able to open it in some form or fashion. You're going to want to take some notes on this. We're going to talk about some common issues that I see with scary stories that I've done over the years, and hopefully I won't take all of your time. I'm going to try to do this rather quickly, but here we go. So first, you should see on my screen here, talking about punctuation with dialogue. Well, what am I talking about? Well, when you're punctuating with dialogue, the if the dialogue comes at the end of the sentence, you put the period or the punctuation inside the quotation marks, just like I have it right here. And if you have an identifying tag like she said or he said or she yelled or whatever, you want to put a comma right after that and right before the dialogue. Um, if the identifying tag, is at the end of the dialogue, then instead of putting the period inside the dialogue, you move the period to the end of the identifying tag right here, and then you put a comma inside the quotation marks. There's an exception to this, though. If you have question marks or exclamation points, those go inside the quotation marks and then put a period at the end. Okay? This lets the reader know that what was said was a question. And who said it? Well, she said it. Okay, so that's some basic punctuation stuff. Whenever a new person is talking, it's a brand new paragraph. So, for example, if I'm talking to Johnny and I say, "Hey, Johnny, how are you doing?" That's a paragraph. If Johnny then replies, "Oh, I'm doing well. How are you?" That's another paragraph. If I respond back, "I'm great. Thanks for asking." That's a third paragraph. Even though there's just the two of us talking, whenever somebody different is talking, it's a new paragraph. Somebody different from the person who's currently speaking. If Johnny talks and then goes and does something and then continues to talk, well, it's still Johnny talking, so that's all part of the same one paragraph. But if Johnny talks, then I talk, then Johnny talks again, that's three separate paragraphs. Okay? Anytime that there's a shift in your paragraphs between time and space, so let's say, for example, your first paragraph takes place as a flashback. It's 60 years ago. Okay? Then the next paragraph is present day. We fast forward to present day. You want to separate those paragraphs one of two ways. Either you can just put a space in between, an extra space in between the two paragraphs, or you can go one step further, which I always recommend, just so that there's absolutely no confusion. In between the two paragraphs, put some sort of visual marker. Now, I just used 3 hashtags here, but honestly, you can use whatever little graphic you want. It could be a little curly Q, could be an and sign, could be a little asterisk, hashtags. I don't care. Who cares? This just lets the reader know that there is a break between this paragraph right here and this paragraph, that there's a break in space and or time. So this paragraph could take place 60 years ago on the moon, and this paragraph could take place today on Venus. Who knows? Okay, this indicator right here in the center of the page, in between the two paragraphs, lets the reader know that there is a shift in space and time. So you want to center, if you're going to put a little symbol, you want to center it on that line in between the two paragraphs. Okay? The rest of these, you're going to want to add notes in between them. Um, Internal versus external dialogue. If I'm speaking out loud for other people to hear, even if I'm whispering or mumbling, what I say goes in quotation marks. If I'm thinking it, then what I think goes in italics, not quotation marks. Don't do both. Don't do italics and quotation marks. Just do italics for what's thought and quotation marks for what's said. Otherwise, you're going to confuse your readers. Now, that's for third person. If you're writing in first person, your character is narrating, so, you know, don't do it that way. I'm only speaking for third person. For first person, the entire thing is in their head unless they're speaking out loud. So don't italicize your entire paper um, unless there's something they specifically think and you denote that in your paper, then put that in italics. Okay? So again, if you're writing in third person, if they speak out loud, quotation marks. If they think it, italics. If you're writing in first person, if they speak out loud, quotation marks. That's pretty much it. I had a student one time who had a little child hiding under a bed from a monster. And they were thinking in their head, I hope the monster doesn't find me under here. But they put it in quotation marks. And so as the reader, I got kind of a chuckle out of it because it seemed to me as the reader that they were literally saying out loud, I hope the monster doesn't find me under here. Which, of course, if you're the monster, you're like, I wonder if the kid is under the bed. So anyway, stuff that's thought goes in italics. Stuff that's said goes in quotation marks. The phrase all of a sudden. I get a kick out of this one because it's overused a lot. A lot of students feel the need to heighten the suspense by adding the phrase all of a sudden, but they often overuse it. And so it ends up looking something like this. All of a sudden, Johnny heard a crash and he ran to the door to figure out what it was. And suddenly he saw the monster. And suddenly the monster lashed out at him, and all of a sudden Johnny jumped back. When you do it like that, and of course I'm being a little over the top with my example, what you're literally saying with the phrase all of a sudden, it means instantly. So instantly Johnny heard a noise. Okay. Instantly he ran to the door. Probably not. He's not that fast. Instantly the monster lashed out. Maybe. Instantly he jumped back. I mean, probably not. So use it very sparingly. Unless the event that's happening is happening instantly, don't use that phrase. Your twist ending. This one's kind of a big one. I'm going to spend a minute or two talking about this. I want you to have a twist ending. I do not want you to use the twist, I woke up and it was all just a dream. Okay, but let's talk about what works as a twist ending and what doesn't. If you want the killer to be, let's say your killer is unmasked and, oh my gosh, it's Grandpa. Okay, that's fine. Certainly didn't see that coming. But here's the thing. If you're going to have it be a surprise, like a surprise killer or something, you need to have it set up in your story that there's something wrong with Grandpa. Okay? You don't have to tell us what it is, but just a simple little line like, Grandpa had been acting strangely lately, or for the last few years, or he was off his meds again, or, whatever. Just so that we as the reader know there's something off about Grandpa, so we can be a little suspicious. You don't have to ruin the surprise, but if Grandpa's been absolutely wonderful and sweet this entire story, and now all of a sudden he's a cannibalistic mass murderer, that just doesn't make any sense. There's no motive for him to be that way. So your villain, your antagonist, needs to have motivation, and that motivation needs to be, at the very least, hinted at to your audience so that it doesn't come out of left field. Also, don't introduce characters into your twist that don't exist anywhere else in your story. If Grandpa's the killer, but you've never even mentioned his name anywhere else in your story, and all of a sudden he's your killer, yeah, it's surprising, but it's surprising for the wrong reasons. It's surprising because it doesn't make any sense. Your killer, your monster, your villain at the end, your twist at the end needs to be hinted at some point in your story. So, for example, if you want to have it be known that Grandpa is the killer at the end, well, then something as simple as at the beginning of your story, Dad gets a phone call, and it's the doctors letting him know to be careful because Grandpa has escaped from the asylum, or something like that. Okay? Just so that it's established that that character not only exists, but is a potential threat. Okay? So make your twists make sense. Character motivation and skill sets. It's fine if you want little Johnny to be the hero of the day. It's not okay if little Johnny, who's 10 years old, does things that no 10-year-old should be able to do unless they're some sort of super genius. Now, if you want little Johnny to be a super genius, that's fine too. But again, establish their skill sets. That's all part of that character development. Establish what they can and can't do. So, for example, I had a student once who wrote a story about a zombie apocalypse, and the main character was a sophomore in high school. And he was trapped in the school. The zombies were trying to break in and kill him. He runs into the science lab, and using the materials found in a science lab, he somehow makes an antidote in like a gas form, and he throws the antidote at the zombies, and the gas swells up and the zombies turn back to humans. Here's the problem. That main character, he's a sophomore in high school. Now, I'm sure you guys are all really, really smart, but your typical sophomore in high school is not going to be able to come up with an antidote to a zombie apocalypse while being chased by those very zombies. Okay, it's a high pressure situation. Not only that, but think about the typical items found in a high school science lab. You're talking water, vinegar, maybe some sort of very safe acid. You think those things are going to stop zombies or be the cure to zombies? Not likely. So, have their skill sets make sense. If you want, if your main character is being chased by the villain and he finds a gun and suddenly he puts 2 shots right into the forehead of the villain from 100 yards away, that's some pretty impressive marksmanship. We have no idea that your main character was a good marksman. So maybe establish that with a simple sentence towards the beginning of your story about how the main character always went hunting with his dad every weekend. Something like that. And then that lets us know that your main character is not only comfortable with guns, but is probably a good shot too. Okay. And then motivations. Why, if we go back to my example of Grandpa, the cannibalistic serial killer, why? It's not enough to have a twist where he's the cannibalistic serial killer. Why is he that way? Why does Grandpa want to kill and eat people? Have you established that? Does your villain have a reason for being evil? Or are they just evil for the sake of being evil because you need a bad guy? What's their motivation? Your main character and your villain should both have motivation for doing what they do. Okay. Telling versus showing, we had a whole lesson about this, several videos, so I'm not going to beat around the bush on this or beat a dead horse. Just make sure that when you're talking about showing versus telling, what I'm talking about is adding description to scenes that need it. And typically, there are three scenes or three types of things that are good places to incorporate some description instead of just telling. Those three places are number one, when describing the setting. If you want to talk about the scary old house, don't just tell me the house was scary, describe it. Use your five senses. Number two, description of your villain. What does the monster look like? Don't just tell me the monster was spooky or the man looked sinister. Describe what that looks like. And then third, any sort of conflict or action that's actually happening. The chase scene where the monster is chasing your hero, or the scene where the hero is hiding from the monster, or whatever action is happening, that's a good spot to throw some detail, some description, to show me instead of telling me. The villain wraps their hands around the main character's throat. Describe that. What does that feel like? What kind of sounds are coming out of the hero's mouth as they're being choked to death? What's the color of their face look like in that situation? Describe the scene. Okay, tenses, point of view, the power of consistency. Okay. I don't care if you write your story in present tense. I don't care if you write it in past tense. Just be consistent. If your whole story took place in the past, then all of your verbs should be in the past tense. If your story is currently happening now, then all of your verbs should be in the present tense. If part of your story took place in the past and part of your story takes place now, well, then you need to do like we talked about up here and separate those paragraphs. And the paragraph that took place in the past, all of those verbs in that paragraph should be in the past tense. And the paragraphs that are taking place now, all of those verbs should be in the present tense. Don't mix and match in the middle of a paragraph. And definitely don't mix and match in the middle of a sentence. Johnny had gone to the store tomorrow. What? That doesn't make any sense. You're confusing your reader. There is an exception to that if you're playing around with time travel. But again, if you're playing around with time travel, you should still try to be consistent and use these little symbols and things in between your paragraphs to indicate the time jumps. Okay. And then last but not least, point of view also. I didn't care if you wrote in first person, second person, or third person. Just be consistent. If you want to mix and match, that's fine. But again, if this paragraph is first person and then this paragraph is somebody else's perspective, that's fine. You can do that. But make sure, again, that you separate those paragraphs, those shifts in point of view, with some sort of symbols in the center of that line. Okay, don't mix and match your point of views in the middle of the same paragraph, and definitely don't do it in the middle of the same sentence. Okay, and then last but not least, italics versus caps. If I put my words in all caps, that means that my characters are screaming. Okay? If I want to emphasize a certain word, like I just did there with the word emphasize, then that word needs to be put in italics. Italics emphasize words, all capital letters, scream the words. Okay? So there you go. Oh, and one last thing. Don't end your story. Don't put the words, the end, at the end of your story. Okay? There is a possible exception to this. If you're writing for children, that's fine. And it's a little cutesy, but that's fine. But otherwise, don't write the end. It's unnecessary. I know it's the end of your story because there's no more story on the page. It's redundant. Don't forget to write your final drafts in MLA formatting. Look back at the video that I've posted several times. to get an idea of how to do MLA formatting. You guys have fun and text me or email me or